And welcome back. Thanks for joining us for part two of our conversation with Renata Spinks, the Marine Corps Senior Information Security Officer and Assistant Director for C4. And to go back to some of the discussion that we had earlier today, want to talk a little bit more about the Marine Corps' journey to the cloud from the perspective of software modernization. The Defense Department just released a few weeks back a new software modernization strategy that I think leans really heavily on the idea of continuous delivery, something that you mentioned earlier in the conversation as well, and software factories. Talk a bit about the Marine Corps' perspective on the strategy as a whole, but especially that software factory emphasis and how McBoss plays into that.
So that's a great question. Very familiar with a lot of the DoD positions on DevSecOps and accelerated acquisition is what I'd like to call it. I kind of call it like A squared. And so I was so happy to see that we're thinking about, acquisition and getting past the traditional 1 to 2 to sometimes 3 to 5 year acquisition and procurement cycle from a software development perspective. And the reason why there's opportunity to do those kinds of things is things like McBoss sits on a platform McBoss is part of a platform or software, the business operations support services. And then there's a platform that was designed with things in mind, like you may be familiar with places like Kessel Run, Platform One. There's a Black Pearl out there. Even Army Futures Command has some things that you can take advantage of. It's all about delivering value incrementally and quickly to the warfighter. That means maybe you don't have the full capacity or capability in place. For example, when we migrated from 365 on premises is what I'll call it to the cloud version of O365, we did not wait until we had the identity figured out. We didn't wait until we had everyone's end user devices upgraded. We didn't wait until we had all of the capacity updated at all of the bases. Instead, we came up with release plans. We focused regionally and we took regional approaches. So while, let's just say region 1 was getting healthy, meaning we're upgrading your switches, routers, testing, evaluating, making sure you're cloud ready to start the transition. Oh, by the way, we had team number 2 working in a different region, also doing readiness, but at a different pace because maybe those challenges were different, or maybe the funding hadn't been awarded to those particular contracts. So we didn't wait until everything was funded and everything was in place. And what that did was allowed us to take an agile approach. McBoss allows us to have a platform. And although, you heard about the Innovation Challenge, I think we just recently put out our notice on the Innovation Challenge. But maybe what a lot of people don't know is we had one already about a year ago, right? And so what we did was we pulled together that micro application innovation challenge. That goal was to empower and unleash Marines to target a particular problem set and solve it using software solutions. The ability to place Marines at Platform 1, they literally were assigned to Platform 1. So they got a chance to have hands-on learning of the software lifecycle development approach. Bringing that information back, I think his name was Captain Chu, was one of the guys. He's retired now, but still contributes to the Marine Corps. But bringing that information back and saying, hey, Ms. Spinks, we're doing something in a way that we could probably improve if we just improve how we develop our software. And in order to improve how you develop software, we need a platform. McBoss was one of the platforms that was part of a DoD funded effort, right? The Department of Defense CIO funded, and I think the other services were able to take advantage of this as well. But Marine Corps jumped on it very quickly and started to develop this McBoss using virtual instantiations like Appian, Tanzu, and Pega, right? And so Marines, if there's a Phoenix podcast out there, if you want to Google it, there's a Phoenix podcast, and you can listen to our Marines Can Code episode. And this is where we talk about how the Marines were able to learn coding and actually scripting and create software and actually have actionable applications that could be used in the workplace or in the field. What that did for what McBoss did for us as we started to test and evaluate, we tested about 6 applications, if my memory serves me correctly. The development of the pipeline from 18 months, I'm going to be transparent here, 18 months is where we started. By the end of the innovation challenge, we were able to embed controls. So we talked about cloud. So we went from a risk management perspective, you're talking into the hundreds, 600-700 controls just to try to get the authority to operate. So how can we shorten that timeline? So that those particular platforms, those particular pipelines, so Appian, Pega, and Tanzu, also came with security controls. So we went from almost 600 to inheriting so many controls that the development cycle or the check-in cycle from a DevSecOps perspective was reduced to 72 controls. Now, to some people, 72 may be a large number, but in the software development lifecycle, that really is a small number. It is heaven to an application developer. And being able to use that release, that incremental release approach, meaning you develop code, you put features in place. Let's say the feature is, accessing zoom.gov, and you want to access it from a particular platform and be able to use your microphone and video from the phone. Maybe that's the first increment, that is the first sprint. And that release allows you to check that code in. It's going to run its checks, and it's going to you're going to hear 2 things. You'll hear nothing, and that's great. That means you're good and you can deploy, or you're going to hear this thing called ping. If you hear the ping, it's bad. Okay, there's something that's not right within the security of your application. Application developers love that check-in, check-out process within the software development, because now I have not sat hours and hours and hours developing code, days and days and days, sometimes months and months and months, only for it to run its test and evaluation, and here you don't even hear pings. Your screen just starts doing all this because there are so many security challenges. So we avoid that by being able to use things like McBoss. The system design, no matter if you're taking an incremental approach for 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 8-week sprints, it still allows you to check in that code, use those inherited security controls, and then allow you to continue to develop. So that's been the benefit of McBoss, and moving more applications. As you talk about us migrating to the cloud in O365, but we also have applications out there. We got mission owners that actually have customized applications that are sitting in data centers that need to take advantage of that master compute power, the analytics that comes with it. Oh, by the way, embedded security. So we have to figure out, how do we support those application owners and through that task force model, and move their applications out of these data centers.
I want to come back to the security process and reforms to the ATO process in just a minute, because I know there's a lot going on there. But just to finish up on the software modernization piece, I mean, I asked specifically about McBoss, but one of the sort of top line goals in the DoD software modernization strategy is to have everyone think of all of these factories as an integrated ecosystem. You specifically mentioned several other services factories just a minute ago. It sounds like the Marine Corps is already thinking of this as an ecosystem and not limiting yourselves to McBoss.
Let me tell you, the Marines do not want to do anything all by themselves. We're a team of teams institution. So things that the Navy's working on, like you'll hear about Black Pearl, that is a platform as well. Platform One, we went to visit Kelsey Run. Even if we can't take advantage of the platform because of some particular mission set, because everyone's capabilities are different. Every platform is not a one size fit all. So that's why it's important to understand what those capabilities are. And if there's a capability or a gap, what we call a gap in the Marine Corps, then the first thing we do is go see who else has this, who else is doing this, and what does right look like. And when there's a gap, which McBoss filled a major gap, because some of the challenges was the timing of some of the maturity of those platforms. At the time McBoss was designed and implemented, like I said, it was a DoD funded initiative to say who can go out there and figure this thing out. And so studying things at Kelso Run was helpful for our foundation. But Tanzu is a very custom platform that allows you to create code from scratch. When I say from scratch, that means Appian and Pega, you could do what we call you can have infrastructure as a code. You can do code readiness or inherit certain codes. Like you can kind of for my developers that are listening, I have to be real careful. There are certain scripts and coding languages that are customary. That's why open source is so beneficial. But then there's things that within the Marine Corps is not open source, right? It's only things that are proprietary to the Marine Corps. And so that's why Tanzu's pipeline is so critical, because I need my Marines to sit there and tell me, how am I supposed to generate a morning report when we've migrated that app to the cloud and now things have changed? And a morning report is not something that's common to industry. They would have to come and talk to the Marines and figure out, what do you need for a morning report? What is the morning report? Because that was the first question I asked when one of the Marines mentioned to me that, ma'am, I'm using all these spreadsheets to report readiness for the morning report. And I was just like, what is that? That's not standard. So that's why the customization platforms are so important. And the ability to do so in a quick manner. COVID-19 taught us that, life doesn't stop. And oftentimes, not just a pandemic, although I'm giving that as much appreciation as I can, because that was something that shocked the world. And it continues to be something we live with every day. But there's also things like hurricanes. There's also things like earthquakes. And those things occur and limit readiness. And so the ability to deploy Marines most recently to Haiti and the earthquake relief funds, and when tornadoes happen, Marines are there as well. When we're supporting many types of unanticipated actions, the ability to customize and develop apps at the ready is what MidBoss is about. And that software modernization and those factories are so critical, because the next step, I know you say you're going to go to ATO, but the next thing that we're talking about is reciprocity, right? And cyber readiness from a reciprocity perspective. Reciprocity, taking advantage of other platforms that exist. Again, it's like our one network. It doesn't stop and start. These things are complementary to each other.
Yeah, that's a good transition point for you to put on your CISO hat for the next 10 minutes or so that we have you here. New initiative in the Department of the Navy called Cyberready. I think the high-level goal that Mr. Weiss, the Dawn CIO, has is to move away from this process where you go down a checklist every 3 years and you get an ATO that's good for 3 years, and move to something more like, I think the buzzword is continuous ATO. But what's the Marine Corps' perspective on all of this, on this entire Cyberready initiative, and why is it important?
So the Commandant has talked a lot about Force Design 2030, right? And 2030 is really today. I understand that this is 2022, but the way technology moves and the need for an elastic infrastructure and the platforms that are needed to support the many changes that we're making from a force design perspective, the ability to have that data center footprint reduced, cloud-enabled applications and cloud-ready applications, because some of them will not be able to migrate. We will still have some legacy systems that may be a small footprint of data centers within the Marine Corps. The standardization of designs and enhancing flexibility are all based on readiness. So when you hear Mr. Wise talk about readiness, the first thing that he always focuses on is it takes too long for readiness to be implemented. So if we just think about just ready, something as simple as when you want to go, maybe you have an appointment at the doctor and someone's riding with you. The first thing we ask as human beings are you ready? And then they say, yes. And then you look at them and you see if they're ready, right? And then you say, well, no, you don't have your shoes on, so you're not ready. So now I have to wait for you to get ready because you still don't have your shoes on, but I'm ready to go. That's the ATO process. Do you have your shoes on? Do you have your purse? Do you have your cell phone? I mean, those critical things that you know you need to have before you walk out the door to get to this particular destination. So cyber readiness is part of that. So cyber readiness takes on that same approach. We're all familiar with the RMF, love all the DoD instructions, their guidelines, their frameworks. They give you foundationally, here are the things you need to address. And then there's those famous checklists, right? And so this is a bit controversial, but I'm going to say it because I love to be transparent. I think checklists drive complacency. Okay. They not only drive complacency, but the word POAM is in the same sentence as complacency. Being complacent on a network is something the Department of Navy is getting after 100%. Marine Corps is driven by discipline and compliance, meaning the checklist, we check all the boxes. And if we don't have all the boxes checked, then we do risk tolerance and risk acceptance. And that's where the POAMs come in place, so that application can either connect and operate, or sometimes we've even visited conditional authorities to operate now, because that's the way we will transition to that continuous ATO that the Department of Defense is talking about as well. So from the cyber readiness perspective, that's all included. How do you get away from being driven by paperwork and checklists and get to a point where your systems are consistently being monitored, whether that's auto red teaming, because there's some great tools out there now that industry has presented that has the capabilities of just automatically checking an already deployed application. So that's one piece. Another piece of the readiness is after you have your compliance, because guess what? We're not getting rid of compliance. Defense in depth still exists. Zero trust and those pillars that are in place, there still is a requirement for compliance. Someone is still going to check your homework. The readiness piece comes from, I'm not just going to pull out a piece of paper and check it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use tools, and the automation of that allows you to number one, be able to assess and scan more applications. The tools also have the ability to be programmed. Artificial intelligence and machine learning has the ability to look for certain things so that we can continue and to not only have cyber readiness, but Mr. Wise likes to call it currency. And so we will keep assessing your currency. And he likes to explain it like the Python license that he has. And I have a special place in my heart for aviators, because those pilots have to go through a lot to stay ready to be able to fly those planes. And when you think about it, if we can take that approach from an aviation perspective, when you are responsible for lives, right, or equipment, cargo, whatever it is, it's not just about what you're carrying, but God forbid if something bad happens in flight, then there's an effect of whatever's on the ground, whether that's people, animals, whatever, infrastructure or whatever. So if we can take that approach with aviation, that is the same approach we need to take with our technology. And so that's where the readiness comes. Are you ready? You said you're ready. Okay, prove to me you're ready. And I want to keep you current. And the reason cyber readiness and that cyber currency is so important is because we have something called data that the bad guy wants. Okay, they're not targeting credentials. They're not targeting, identities. Those are the categories of efforts that they go after. But the ultimate target is to get to data, whether that's data for pre-positioning because of warfighting readiness, logistics, where do we have our equipment? Where do we have Marines being deployed to? The bad guy is becoming more and more sophisticated. I don't have to remind everyone about, the Colonial Pipeline. I don't have to remind everyone about network obfuscation and attempts to discover our networks using tools that are designed to do so. I mean, we've had some very sophisticated, gut-wrenching exploitations. So if we don't keep cyber readiness at the forefront, and if we keep handing out 3-year ATOs and not revisiting, recertification until 6 months into that 3-year certification, then I think we're doing an injustice to not only our end users, but also those who are consuming the services. and the world at large, because again, there's no start and stop. There's a complementary effect to all of that.
Down to about our last 3 minutes here, and I can't let you get away without talking a bit about zero trust. You were bold enough at the start of this conversation to say that zero trust was easy peasy, I quote, in the Marine Corps. I think you're the first person in DoD who's ever said the words easy and zero trust in the same sentence.
Yeah.
So justify that for us. Tell us why it's easy for you.
I think zero trust is about culture. That's why it's easy peasy. Implementing and creating the technologies and making all the changes, that's the hard part. But just accepting the fact that this is not about 5 and 10 years ago, when our systems looked very different, the adversaries tools and techniques were very different. The reason it's easy peasy is if you just change your mindset, zero trust is just another way to increase our defense in depth posture, ensure compliance, and keep ourselves current so that we're always ready. The reason why I will also expand and justify it being easy peasy is because we're already doing it. I really don't think that zero trust and 5 years from now, whatever it gets called then, or 10 years from now, the principles and the pillars that have been network security, data visibility, these things have always been something we paid attention to and designed our architectures to. The difference is the designs are different now. It's not on premises now, it's cloud. It's no longer 115 megabytes, that's enough. Now we're talking 10 gigabytes to up to 100 gigabytes. So zero trust is just evolution, right? And so I stand by my word, easy peasy, because in the Marine Corps, we focus, the ethos is compliance, discipline, and readiness. That's the ethos. And so, the few, the proud, however way you want to call it, easy peasy, easy day. Everyone in the military says easy day, even if we know it's hard. We accept the challenge and we get after it. And we're going to bulldoze through it with all of our partners that we have. We're not doing this alone. You look at the White House executive order, you look at what CISA is doing, you look at the NSA, easy peasy. We're all, it's a team of teams. And so we're going to get after it and we're going to continue to evolve. Architectures are going to change as we learn more and more. As the adversary pivots, we're going to respond to that. We're going to use intel and how those tools and techniques and procedures that they are using to improve our networks and to bolster the defenses that we need, as well as the approaches that we have to change. Because it's really not just about the technology, it's also about the people and making sure they're trained and that they're equipped with the knowledge that's needed, whether they're working from home, working in the office, working in desolate locations. All that's important. So easy day.
There is a ton more we could talk about, but unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there for time. Ms. Spinks, it's been a great conversation. Thanks so much for joining us for the DoD Cloud Exchange. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Renata Spinks is both the Marine Corps Senior Information Security Officer and the Assistant Director for C4. I'm your moderator, Jared Serbu. You're listening to Federal News Network. Now let's go back to the studio for more on the DoD Cloud Exchange.